So I wanted to make part three of my series on my healing journey. Um, the sort of techniques and methods that I have found helpful, and just kind of splitting it up into stages. And I have to say, this is therapeutic for me to talk about, and someone might get benefit out of it. And so that's why I'm doing this series. It's therapeutic for me to talk about my healing journey, I have to admit, because so much of this is internal. So much of it goes on inside your own head, inside your own feelings, inside your own body. And it can actually just be quite nice to just put words to it and sort of try to bring it into some kind of a structure. Before I get started, I just want to provide my usual disclaimer that I am not a mental health professional at all. I'm not an expert in any of this. A lot of the things that I talk about in this series are drawn from what I've learned from mental health professionals, but I am not a mental health professional. I'm not qualified to guide you on this journey. This is me just talking about my own experiences and what it's been like for me and what has helped me. And I do think that stories and hearing the experiences of others can be extremely powerful and extremely helpful. They certainly have been for me. I would say some of the most powerful things along my journey have been connecting with other people who have gone through something similar and being able to just see how they've coped and learn from them and just connect with them to help myself feel less alone. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just sort of expressing myself, just expressing what my healing journey has been like. And maybe there are some, nuggets of helpful information that you can glean from that. So the previous two stages that I talked about were stage one is just understanding what happened to you, just naming it, defining it, so that it kind of gives you a starting point. Understanding the problems that the abusive person in your life was probably going through, which caused them to mistreat you. The second stage that I talked about was setting boundaries, which I feel is really one of the most important, if not the most important stage or phase of healing, because that's the stage that really protects you. The third stage that I want to talk about today is what I call unraveling or healing. And please excuse me if I don't make consistent eye contact with the camera. Making a lot of eye contact or reminding myself to make eye contact can be a little bit overwhelming for me. And then I do just want to focus on my notes and on what I want to say. So I'll try and make eye contact as much as possible. But if I don't, then, it's because I'm neurodivergent. It's because I just need to focus on getting my thoughts out. So, unraveling, healing from abuse, from trauma, for me, a huge part of that has been to do with feeling my emotions. In my case, a lot of the trauma was around having to suppress my emotions, particularly suppressing so-called negative emotions. Now, I don't believe that emotions are positive or negative. I very much subscribe to the idea that emotions are morally neutral. They are information, and they are messages that lead us back to our core values and to what's important to us. And they can be really, really important kind of signals to let us know that something in our environment is either great and really working for us or really not good and really bad or unhealthy for us. So emotions are wonderful, but often in abusive families, emotions are repressed. And why? Because the emotions are usually the again, as I've just said, they're the messages that let the victim know that something is not right. So it's in the abusive person's interest to diminish and minimize emotions, particularly negative emotions, much the same way that they do with boundaries. You know, boundaries represent a threat to an abusive family because boundaries put a limit and a cap on the abuse. And emotions are the things that let as I say, let the victim know that something is not right. And so the more that an abusive person can get a victim to suppress their emotions and doubt their emotions and not listen to their emotions and just push them right down, the more they will be able to get away with the abuse. That may not be consciously what they're thinking. They might not there's a lot of talk around, do abusive people know what they're doing? Are they aware of it? I believe that they are aware of it to a greater or lesser extent. But that doesn't mean that everything that they do and the motive behind it is always conscious. So some of the negative emotions that were particularly suppressed in my family were anger, annoyance, frustration, disappointment, sadness, grief, pain, just not wanting to do something, unwillingness, that kind of thing. Those were emotions that were very much discouraged in my family. And so a big part of healing for me has been getting back in touch with those emotions, which hasn't been easy in my case anyway. Some people seem to have an easier time accessing their emotions than others, and there can be lots of reasons for that. But in my case, it has been difficult to get in touch with those negative emotions that I just mentioned, because there is such a negative stigma around them growing up. So it's just been a case of just slowly working with myself, being very patient and empathetic with myself to allow myself to access my healthy anger, identifying where I feel shame, where that shame originally came from. Is that shame healthy or unhealthy? How can I talk to myself differently about those situations so that I can understand my emotions? I say this in other videos as well, but the aim is not to get rid of the emotion, because we don't necessarily want to turn the volume down on our emotions. I don't think we should. I think we should allow our emotions because emotions are so useful and beneficial for so many reasons. But it's just about understanding the emotion. What is it trying to tell you? Is that message a healthy, functional message, or is it a dysfunctional message? What is the voice behind the emotion? And what's the message of the emotion? But yeah, just accessing my emotions, feeling my emotions, understanding my emotions has been a very, very big part of the healing journey for me. There can be a lot of grief when you're talking about healing from childhood trauma. There's grief about a lot of things. Grief, in essence, is about loss. It's about realizing that you either no longer have what you once had or that you never had something that you wanted or needed. Grief is very powerful. And so it makes sense that you'd feel a lot of grief when you're talking about healing from childhood abuse, childhood trauma. I've certainly felt a lot of grief about a lot of things, primarily about not having the parenting or the relationships with my parents that I needed. And that grief can take a very long time to process. I mean, grief, I think it's sometimes portrayed in our society as if with grief, you go through certain stages and then you eventually move on from it. Like grief comes to an end. But that hasn't been my experience. My experience of grief is that it persists, it comes in waves and then it subsides. So it like ebbs and flows. And each time it kind of surges forth and you feel it a little bit more intensely, it's an opportunity for you to deal with unfinished business from the past, or just an opportunity to love yourself through the experience, or to remember what happened to you. That can be important sometimes. It can be an important part of grief, or at least, again, it has been for me. I've spoken before about how my brother, whom I absolutely adored, we were very close. He died in a tragic accident just before his 16th birthday. I had just turned 18, and the grief of that has honestly never fully left me, and I don't expect that it will fully leave me for the rest of my life. I think it will be with me as as long as I live. Um, but sometimes it surges forth a little bit more strongly than others. It's kind of like something that's always present in my heart. Um, but most of the time it's bearable. It's there, but I can cope. I can move on with my life without too much trouble. But then there are times that it just sort of hits me a bit more intensely. And at those times, it can be just a reminder to think about my brother and what he meant to me and his great qualities, and how I might want to um, try and embody those qualities more in myself, or maybe try and look for those qualities in other people, or just remember the amazing person that he was, the memories that we had together. um, or it can sometimes the grief is just about myself, where I just need to cry and I just need to be present with myself, or seek comfort from someone maybe, or just kind of just be extra gentle and extra empathetic with myself. So that's kind of an example from my own life at how I experience grief. Um, but I think a lot of dealing with emotions for me has just been sort of taking the sting out of the emotions, just giving myself permission to feel the emotions without attaching a sense of good or bad to the emotion. Because, as I've already said, in my family, you were painted or characterized as being badly behaved or wrong or bad, just bad in some way if you expressed certain negative emotions. Especially anger, especially any sort of defiance or resistance to my parents was, you know, met with a lot of shaming language. So my parents were big on using shame, guilt, obligation as a way to suppress negative emotions. So, a lot of the healing journey for me has just been reconnecting with those emotions from a neutral place. Like, oh, I'm feeling really angry. I'm feeling really annoyed. I'm feeling really frustrated. I'm feeling really sad. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I'm feeling just overstimulated. Those sorts of emotions, which were characterized as bad when I was growing up. I was made to feel a lot of shame around those emotions. And how can I now, in my present life, just feel the emotions without attaching a message to them? So I'll just give you an example of anger from my own life. Um, when I'm driving, I would say I'm a pretty careful and patient driver, like in terms of how I drive. But sometimes driving can create big feelings in me. Sometimes I get big feelings when I'm driving. I can feel frustrated and annoyed with other drivers on the road, or I can feel frustrated and annoyed with things that slow down my journey. You know, if there are roadworks or if there are road closures or traffic jams or whatever. And I'm sure everyone who drives can relate to this. So I know I'm not unusual or unique in this way. But those big feelings that I have when I'm driving, um, because of how I was raised, I would have shamed myself for feeling that way in the past. I would have talked to myself really negatively, like, oh, you're not allowed to feel angry because there's a traffic jam. You have to somehow transform that anger into calmness and patience and kindness and all this sort of thing. And there was like one day that I was feeling particularly annoyed in traffic, and I was by myself in my car, and I was just swearing to myself, just swearing at the situation inside my car. And I felt that old familiar urge to shame myself for doing that. And then I thought, you know what? Why am I shaming myself? This is a victimless crime. There's no one around. No one can hear me. I'm not swearing at anyone. I'm not abusing anyone. I'm not in any way hurting anyone else or offending anyone else. I'm just alone in my car and no one can hear me. If I want to swear at the situation, I can go ahead and do it. It's it's a healthy, um, non-destructive way for me to just get my feelings out and to send the message to myself that it's okay to feel anger. It's not okay to hurt people when you're feeling angry. It's not okay to be abusive. It's not okay to rage at people. It's not okay to blame people or, you know, trespass on other people's boundaries. That's not okay. So, what you do with your anger is important. But the emotion itself is morally neutral. It's okay to feel the anger. It's okay to express it in a way that doesn't hurt other people. It's okay to express it in a way that sends the message to yourself that this emotion is all right. It's okay for me to feel this. And so nowadays, if I'm feeling frustrated when I'm driving because of something, because of maybe how someone else is driving, or because of just things that happen on the road that are outside of my control that slow me down or that, cause frustration. I'm sure you could think of 100 examples. If I want to just swear in my car, if I just want to feel my emotions, if I want to scowl, I want to frown, I want to just mutter under my breath, I allow myself to do it. And 99% of the time, when I reach my destination, I feel calm. I feel less stressed because I've allowed myself to express my anger in a way that doesn't hurt anyone else, um, but in a way that allows me to get the anger out. So I would encourage you to do that. If this is something that you resonate with, if you resonate with having to suppress anger and you struggle to get in touch with your healthy anger, um, then think about ways that your anger could be expressed in a way that doesn't hurt other people. So maybe for you, it's journaling. Journaling is another thing I like to do if I'm feeling frustrated or angry. I journal in the form of writing out my feelings, or else I use the recording app on my phone to just talk my feelings out. And again, it's a way for me to get my feelings out. It's a way for me to process my big feelings, my thoughts, without hurting other people. And I always feel so much better and so much lighter. And the emotion dissipates so much quicker when I do that. So the next point that I've got under this whole heading of unraveling and healing, and by the way, I think the unraveling slash healing stage, which is what I've called this stage, I think this is probably a stage that lasts through your entire life. Whereas identifying the abuse and setting boundaries can be like short-term stages, they can be sort of quite finite with a beginning and an end. Unraveling, the internal stuff is probably going to be a lifelong process, or it's going to be a very, very much a long-term process. I talked a little bit just now about ways to process the information that comes up when you start to engage in the healing process. Journaling. Journaling in the form of writing or audio journaling, processing in therapy, having a skilled mental health professional who can take you through your emotions, take you through the memories that might come up, help you to just identify what's healthy and what's unhealthy. You may find that when you're deep in the healing or going through a particularly sort of intense phase of the healing process, which again ebbs and flows, but you might find that you have dreams about your family, or dreams about the abusive person. Like, I find that still happens to me. It happened quite a lot, like earlier on. Not so much these days, but I find that it does happen occasionally. If I've been thinking about this stuff a lot, I will occasionally just have dreams about members of my family or about things that I experienced in childhood. Memories can resurface as you're unearthing emotions and accessing your emotions. Memories can come to the surface, things that you might have forgotten or suppressed. That's very common. So it's important to have a healthy way of processing not only the emotions, but also the dreams and memories that can come up, because it can be quite intense. It can be, if you've repressed a lot, then having it all come to the surface can be kind of overwhelming. So having some sort of a good outlet or a good channel to work through those things is super important, whether that's journaling, whether you have a therapist that you can work with, who can sort of just guide you through what comes up for you. There is also inner child work, which I'm not an expert on, or I don't like. I've found it helpful. I've incorporated a little bit of it into my own healing work, but I wouldn't want to speak on it in too much detail because I'm not too well versed on it. My knowledge of it is fairly basic, but I would highly encourage you, if you're interested in inner child work, to check out Patrick Tien's channel. There are other therapists on YouTube as well who've made videos going into how to do inner child work, but it can be extremely useful. It's Inner child work essentially is about going back into your childhood and getting in touch with the child version of yourself and helping them to understand what they went through. Because a lot of the emotional and mental abuse that happens is because of the way that the child interprets what happens to them. They interpret it as being their fault. They internalize messages about themselves, which lead to problems with self-worth, which lead to triggers later on in life. And so inner child work is about taking your adult self, who now understands the abuse, who understands what happened, and going back and talking to your child self and helping them to see it in a healthier way. And it's also about having your adult self sort of stand in the gap for your inner child, because the inner child can still feel like they are fighting those battles that they had in childhood, where they were kind of defenseless. They didn't have the tools that they needed. They weren't equipped to fight those battles because they were children, and they should never have had to fight those battles. But a lot of the time, neglected and abused children are not properly protected by the adults in their lives, and so they can feel like they have to take those burdens on themselves. And so it's also, as I say, it's about having your inner adult come and stand in the gap for the inner child, for your child self, and say, okay, you don't have to fight these battles anymore. I'm here. I'm an adult. I have the tools. I'm old enough and wise enough and strong enough to fight these battles for you. And so it just kind of allows your inner child to relax and go back to being a child, or that's sort of that's the hope anyway. We all have an inner child. We all have a part of ourselves that is still stuck in childhood, and that's okay. It's just about what our inner child is believing about what happened in childhood. That's the part that's important. And where your adult self now that has all that understanding, they can help the inner child. So that is my understanding of it. But therapists who are trained in inner child work can definitely help you with that if that feels like, a useful method to you, if you feel like that would help you. I found it helpful. It's just one tool of many that you can use. Um, so I've talked about reinterpreting, when dreams and especially when memories of your childhood come up, it's about reinterpreting them through a healthy lens. That's been a big part of my own healing journey. Memories have come up for me of things that happened in childhood, and it's amazing how many things I suppressed or repressed as I moved from childhood into adulthood. My family was very much one of those families where you don't talk about things. When an incident happens, when an incident of abuse or mistreatment happens, you don't talk about things. You just keep it moving, and you then act as if the incident never happened. You sweep it under the rug, and you just keep trucking on. You keep moving forward as if it never happened. You don't go back. You don't make amends. You don't address what happened. You don't try to heal. You just surge forward as if it never happened. I talked in the video that I made about being raised by a borderline mother, because I believe that my mom has borderline personality disorder. I talked about the incident where she um, assaulted me with a bucket, and how it was never discussed again. It happened, and I have carried that trauma with me ever since, but it's never been discussed. Never. It's never been addressed. It's never, it just was ignored. And so it's amazing when that happens in a family like that, where things are just suppressed and ignored, and they just barrel on as if the thing never happened. It's amazing how much you end up suppressing, how many memories just get pushed down because you're expected to just keep going. And a big part of healing for me has been just kind of slowing down and not expecting myself to just keep going, giving myself permission to go back into the past and letting memories surface, and then talking myself through the memory from a healthier perspective. Like, okay, my mom's version of that event would have been, well, she just lost her temper. She just lost her cool. She was feeling stressed. She got angry. She lost it. And as soon as the emotion subsided, everyone else was just expected to move on. The way I interpret it now as a healthy adult, or an adult who is reinterpreting the incident through a healthy lens, is that was abusive, that was assault, it was actually criminal, and we don't just move on from incidents like that as though they never happened. I have a right to my feelings about it. I have a right to want it to be addressed and redressed. I have a right to want amends to be made. And I also have a right to decide whether amends can be made. Some incidents you just can't move on from. Some incidents are so bad that they can never there is not necessarily any moving on from it. And that's a healthy way of looking at that incident, as far as I'm concerned. That I get to, because I was the victim in that situation, I get to say what that incident meant to me and how I want to move forward, or if I want to move forward. So that's just an example. I've talked about therapy. This is all of these are tools that you can just kind of accumulate along the way. Therapy is obviously a huge part of it. If you have access to a therapist, a trauma-informed therapist, it's something I highly recommend. It can be hugely validating and helpful to have someone who is in a position of authority, or an expert, validate what you went through and your feelings, and to sort of be alongside you through the process. Sometimes it can all get very kind of overwhelming and confusing, and so having a therapist as a skilled outside voice to just help you through it can be a really valuable thing. I understand that therapy is expensive though, and not only is it expensive, but it can be difficult to find a therapist that you truly feel comfortable with, that you have a rapport with. And so therapy is something which is definitely very valuable, but it has its it has its considerations as well, things that you need to consider. They always say that, like, if you're getting advice about how to choose a therapist, the best piece of advice that I've heard is choose a therapist who resonates with you, that you feel comfortable with. Someone, if it feels right, then it is right. And if it feels wrong, then don't force yourself to keep going with a therapist who just doesn't quite feel right. I've gone through a few different therapists where I just was like, oh, that's just this thing that they said, or this approach that they took just doesn't sit right with me. It's just not, this person is just not the right person to help me on my journey. And then I've also been blessed to, well, not blessed, but fortunate to find some really fantastic therapists who have helped me a lot. So therapy, definitely huge, hugely beneficial, hugely recommend that. But don't be daunted by the prospect of, finding the right therapist. And don't be afraid to try a few different therapists to find the one that works for you or that you feel comfortable with. The supportive relationships, I find, are a huge part of this as well. As you're moving through unraveling your trauma, you're going to need supportive people around you. And I found this to be a huge, huge and very, very beneficial part of my healing process. Connecting with people who are able to hold space, able to be caring and empathetic, able to be supportive, people who are able to maybe relate to what I've been through, people who've been through the same thing. And they don't all have to be like best friend type relationships. You can connect with people in all sorts of different ways. You can connect with people via forums online like Reddit, or you can perhaps connect with a coworker that you feel comfortable sharing with, or acquaintances that you might meet when you're out and about, or friends that you decide to just open up to. But be on the lookout for how to find supportive friendships and supportive relationships. Even when you're dating and choosing a partner, I do think that this is an important consideration. Is that person able to hold space for your healing journey? Are they able to be empathetic and supportive? There are a lot of people out there who are good people who may not necessarily have the capacity or the skills or the emotional uh, intelligence to be a supportive person on your journey. And that's okay. They might just not be the right person for you. But I would say actively choosing people and friendships and relationships in every area of your life that are supportive makes a huge difference. It can be a really, really great way to support yourself in developing healthier patterns. If you have supportive people around you, if most of the people in your life are supportive and empathetic. I'm very, very fortunate to have a job where I work with very empathetic people who are just really kind and caring and patient. And it makes such a difference, going to work each day and knowing that I don't have to worry about being criticized, invalidated, shouted at, bossed around, all these awful things that can be very triggering if you're a survivor of abuse. My coworkers are all really respectful and kind, and they speak to me with decency and in a very respectful way. And I can talk to them if I'm struggling with something. My managers, likewise, they're very kind, patient people. And so I regard myself as very fortunate in that way. And that is what I would want for every childhood abuse survivor. Actively choose people to be around who are kind and patient and supportive and who can support you on your healing journey, whatever that looks like for you. Because you're going to have days that are going to be tough. And that's when it can become really valuable and beneficial to have people to lean on. The next point that I've got here is something that I've already sort of touched on, but it's working through difficult emotions related to the abusive parent. This has been a tough one for me, but emotions like guilt and even like missing your abusive parent if you've chosen to go no contact or low contact. There can be definitely some difficult emotions that come up around that. So, as I say, I think two of the most common emotions are guilt, like, do I have the right to reduce contact with my parent? Am I doing the right thing? Am I a bad person? All that kind of thing. But then also missing the good parts of that parent. I've spoken before about how I am no contact with my dad. Luckily, I would say that this has been going on for such a long time that I'm now at a point where I'm very much at peace with my decision, and I don't have these difficult emotions come up that much these days. But certainly in the beginning, they came up a lot more, and especially if you have people in your life who don't understand or don't agree with your decision, it can really cause emotions like guilt to surface a lot more. And so I would also I would say, be careful about who you share, information about your healing journey and decisions around contact. Be careful who you share that with, because not everyone is going to have the capacity to understand. And it can make it more difficult for you if you have people who are going to make you feel worse about it. People who are going to encourage you to feel guilty, or who are going to kind of sow seeds of doubt in your head. So just be careful around, emotions like guilt. I would say feelings like guilt are a great place, or something that's great to work through with a therapist. The therapists that I've worked with have been really, really fantastic in helping me to understand and make sense of my guilt and where it's misplaced and how to work with it in a healthier way. So guilt is a great one to work through in therapy if you can. But yes, there are also going to be times where you're probably going to miss your parent. No abusive person is all bad. Every abusive person has good qualities, and there would have been good days. Doesn't mean that the relationship wasn't abusive, but it can still trip us up, at times where we remember those good times. It can be very confusing. So, like the confusion and the feelings of loss and missing that person can sometimes be difficult. So I've got some questions that you can ask yourself around that to help yourself through it that have helped me is like when you're feeling guilt, when you're feeling like you miss your parent, how can how can I show up for myself now? What can I do for myself to support myself through this? How can I be that parent to myself today? What can I do for myself that is particularly kind or loving or supportive? How can I give myself what I need without relying on or deferring to my parents? If this is a decision that you've taken for very good reasons, and there are certain needs that your parent can't meet, and you know they can't meet those needs, it's normal to still have days where you miss your parent and where you wish that they could meet those needs. But it's about recognizing the limitations of that parent. They're a human being that struggles in certain ways, and there are certain things that you needed from them that they couldn't provide. But how can you provide those things to yourself now? Or is there a person in your life that can help you to fill that gap? So something something which I heard in one of Dr. Kirk Honda's podcasts, and his is another channel I can highly recommend. He's great. I like to listen to him from time to time. But something he said in one of his podcasts was sometimes when you're missing an abusive parent, it can be like the remnants of codependence and enmeshment. If you've been enmeshed with an abusive parent or if you became codependent, it's very normal to miss aspects of that, even though it's not healthy. And so it's also just about noticing that, noticing when I miss my parent, what does that mean? What is it saying? Is it aspects of the relationship that we're enmeshed or that we're codependent that I miss? Because if so, then that can be a starting point for you to just process that and talk yourself through it. Like, for example, I know that aspects of my relationship with my mom were enmeshed and codependent. And sometimes when I miss her and I think about, okay, what is it that I miss? I realize that the things that I miss were actually quite codependent, or they were things that were aspects of enmeshment that were not good for me. And so it can be an opportunity for me to just talk myself through it and, really, really process at a deeper level. And that can really help with the emotions. And then the last point that I've got under this, sorry about me blowing my nose. I always struggle with hay fever or like sort of a little bit of a cold when the weather starts to cool down like this. But the last point that I've got under this stage is noticing where the conditioning shows up. So if you grew up in an abusive family like me, you were almost certainly conditioned in certain ways, conditioned to believe certain things, conditioned to behave in certain ways, conditioned to feel in certain ways. And a big part of this is just noticing how much of what you think and feel, how much of your behavior is about your conditioning. And it's about sort of unearthing the authentic self that's underneath the conditioning. So a really fun part of the healing process for me has been getting in touch with my authentic self underneath the conditioning that I experienced in my family of origin. Your authentic self is always there, they don't go away, but they can get buried under these layers of trauma and conditioning. And so, recognizing the conditioning and kind of excavating it a little bit is a way to get in touch with the authentic self underneath. And that can be really fun, like discovering who you are without the messaging from your family. And I've really enjoyed that. It's felt like a very liberating, freeing, just wonderful experience for me to get in touch with my true self, free of the conditioning of my family. And so I wanted to end on that note because it's really that can really be sort of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for all of this. It can be that's where the real payoff comes in, is really getting in touch with and discovering and expressing your true authentic self, and growing to love that person, and helping their voice to grow stronger. It's like a really wonderful part of the healing journey. Free of the shackles of conditioning. So that's where I'm just going to leave it for today, and I will come in with another video about stage 4 very shortly, probably in the next few days. So in the meantime, please take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.